Kuuk Thaayorre. They're an Aboriginal group that lives on the west coast of Cape York. This is a group I had a chance to work with for a little bit. One thing that brought me to this place, to Pormpuraaw, where they live, is that in their language, they don't use words like left and right in all spatial orientations. Now, of course, in English, we also have north, south, east, and west. What's different about the Kuuk Thaayorre, and there are lots and lots of languages like this around the world, is that in Kuuk Thaayorre, you use north, south, east, and west at all scales. And you also use them precisely. So what do I mean by all scales? You would say things like, there's an ant on your southwest leg. And then if you turned your body, of course, your southwest leg would no longer be your southwest leg. It might now be your northeast leg. The way you say hello in Kuuk Thaayorre is to say, what direction are you going? And the response should be something like, north-northwest in the far distance. How about you? So you literally can't get past hello in this language if you don't know your heading direction. Imagine as you navigate your world, everyone who says hi to you, you have to report which way you're heading. If that was a basic requirement for communication, you would start to get oriented pretty fast. So this is a wonderful example of, it's not just the words that exist in the language, it's how you're required to use those words. It's how you have to, what you have to know to use the words to participate in the linguistic community. Even though we have words like north, south, east, and west, we don't use them very precisely. We don't use them at lots and lots of scales. And as a result, we can do the experiment right now, actually. Everyone close your eyes. I can see you, so I can tell whether or not you closed your eyes. All right. Point southeast. Don't cheat. Okay, you can open your eyes. So if you point there. I have no idea which way it is myself. But since I'm a cognitive scientist, let me make a few observations about what you guys did. When I first asked you to point southeast, many of you laughed. And I assume you didn't laugh because you thought, what an insultingly simple question. Why would she ask me such an insulting question? So if I asked you, do you know which way up is? You might have laughed for that reason. But instead you thought, probably, how am I supposed to know that? Then it took you a while to point. So if I had asked you to point up, you wouldn't have to think about it. You would just be able to point. But for southeast, you probably had to do some mental rotation. Probably imagine the way that you got into this room and thought about maybe where the ocean is or where the mountains are last time you saw the outside, or the sunset maybe. You had to do a lot of mental refiguring. So it took some time. The reaction time was long. And then, of course, there's a question of accuracy. You pointed in every possible direction. I don't know which one is right, but clearly not all of you were correct. So this is an example of if you participate in a particular linguistic community that requires you to use the words in the language in a particular way, that shapes the kinds of things that you must attend to just in order to be able to speak the language. And so there's this interplay between not just the words that you have, but how you're supposed to use them that changes the way you think. So just to conclude this part, so much of what we believe we're perceiving as reality is actually cultural heritage. It's knowledge systems that have been passed down to us through many, many generations of language change within our culture. We benefit tremendously from this cultural knowledge. Right? So the cultures that we grow up in make us tremendously smart. We're endowed with so much incredible knowledge that's been built in. But at the same time, cultures reduce cognitive entropy. There are many different ways to see the world. There are many different ways to categorize the world. And yet the way we tend to do it is the way that our language and culture tends to do it. And once you're in one of those trenches, it's very hard to poke your head out and see all the other ways that you could have done it instead. So with that, I think I'll conclude. Thank you. I love that idea. Just watched me and said, of course, you're Russian. Because Russianness is this like magical thing that surrounds you, that allows you to win in chess, apparently. Right? And so, of course, I always feel like I didn't win because of some magical Russianness. I won because I'm smarter than you. I played better. You made mistakes and I capitalized, and I didn't make it. So the question there, though, is that it helps the person explain behavior to put me in a category. If you put someone in a category and say they're Russian, that then has causal properties. You've tapped into some essential nature that that person must have, and that essential nature can cause them to be good at chess, or it can cause them to like pickles, or it can cause them to do all kinds of other things that belong to that category. And it's the same with liberal or progressive. Once you put someone in that category, you believe that you can predict many, many things about them that spring from that essential nature.
And so that's exactly what Kafka was resisting when he said, "I have nothing in common with the Jews." Vera has nothing in common with the Russians.
Except for my love of pickles.
Well, I think there's also another facet of this, which I was wondering if we were going to be able to get through this evening without the election coming up, and my guess was no. I'm thrilled that it came up. But there's also the other thing of the coining of new words and new characteristics to define people, which then come to be seen as somehow innate. So one great example of this is the word scientist, which didn't exist before 1834 and was coined for a very specific reason. And that was to say, at that time there was a rise of a lot of relatively well-to-do people who had the leisure to do what we would now call science. They were like gentlemen. And there was a lot of them doing science. And there was also emerging a new class of people who were professional scientists, because it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And so they coined the word scientist as opposed to natural philosopher to say we're the professionals and you people are the amateurs. And then very quickly after 1834, we received physicists and chemists and biologists and geologists. And so there was this kind of new categorization to say, we're actually the true ones and you're somehow the amateurs. And so I was going to ask you there, in your work, do you study, in some sense, as well as the way words are, as it were, allied with what is seen as innate characteristics, the way words can be defined to define social hierarchies or social relationships, and the way that shifts over time too?
That's a very interesting question. It's definitely the case that when you make something nominal, when you make it a noun or a noun phrase, it seems to confer much more permanent or essential features. So, for example, there are lovely experiments that you can do this even with small children. Tell them this creature is a carrot eater versus this creature loves to eat carrots. And then you can ask, under lots of circumstances, will this creature want to eat carrots? What about after it's eaten lots and lots of carrots already? What if it's in an environment where people look down on eating carrots? Will it still want to eat carrots, and so on? And what you find is that if you say something is a carrot eater, even small children will predict that it will be invariantly in love with carrots, will always want to eat carrots, even if it's socially inappropriate, even if it's already eaten a whole lot of carrots, and so on. It becomes this essential property of this entity. Whereas if it's just someone who loves to eat carrots, they're going to be much more malleable. And you can just introspect about this yourself. Do you say, I'm a pianist, or I play the piano? I'm a runner, or I like to run? There's a certain commitment that comes with putting yourself in that noun category, that you're declaring an identity rather than just a predilection.
So you're declaring an identity rather than just simply naming an activity.
That's right.
Jim, I know you've prepared a special treat for us, and we're going to get around to it. Picasso once said that the function of an artist is to name things, which I thought was just a lovely way of thinking about what the arts do. Now, you have prepared a little presentation, which is a riff on Magritte's famous conception of naming things.
All right. You may have already oversold it. It wasn't meant to be a special treat, but let's just call it a thing, okay? Here's a thing. you're all familiar. This is probably Magritte's most famous picture, right? This is not a pipe. Ceci n'est pas une pipe. It's right over. I'm not going to try to point a direction. You all look ridiculous, by the way. It's over in whatever direction it is at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and everybody thinks, right, it's not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. I think it's fair to say that's the gimmick here. That's the point of this piece of art. And I want to suggest that that's not the whole story, and it might not even be right. That this might not be what Magritte was trying to say. The title of the picture is called The Treachery of Images. So, that makes you think that's an image of a pipe. It's a representation of a pipe. Here's another version of it. Well, now this time it's the same thing, but now you can see that it's a picture. This is maybe a picture of a picture. We've gone one level more meta, one step down a slope of representation or something. There's a question though that I think we should ask, and that is whether, in fact, the representation of a thing is not in the same category as the thing. Here's another picture by Magritte. The title of this one is Attempting the Impossible. Now, the woman is not a woman. It's a picture of a woman, and you can tell because the arm isn't even finished. She's being created by the man on the right, but obviously, at least I think, Magritte wants you to have a moment to think, oh, he is just as unreal as she is. He seems to be doing the work, the creating, but if she's not a woman, maybe he's not a man. This one is called Clairvoyance. It's a picture of a picture. You're laughing because I guess you're laughing because you've noticed that he's looking at the egg and painting the bird. Is it a bird, or is it just a picture of a bird? If it's just a picture of a bird, is that an egg, or it's just a picture of an egg? I'm going to try to move a little more quickly here. I'm going to offer these without comment. I think now we can say that this is what we call a meme. Oops. Okay. Now, so this, the first painting was 1926, and Magritte painted this one 40 years later in 1966, and it's called The Two Mysteries. And I think he's trying to make my point here, that either they're both pipes or neither of them is a pipe, or is just one of them a pipe? This is a modern version of This Is Not a Pipe. This is how we say it now, unless we're trying to say no smoking. Now, just to move on from this, the picture of a pipe was a pipe. This is a pipe, right? Okay. What about this? And this? And now we're really in Lyra's pots and pans territory. And I wonder how much of this is language dependent, but that's a pipe, that's a pipe, that's a pipe. That's sort of a pipe, right? Those are pipes. I'm not sure these are pipes in every language. I don't know enough languages to know, and so on. But we've come a long way. This category has come a long way from where it started. This is a pipe. This is a pipe snake, the zoologists will know. That's a piper. You know what that is. This is just a small collection of the things that you get if you Google pipe. And Google presumably is representing us collectively, our collective intelligence, at least in English, about what a pipe is. If all of these things are pipes, according to Google, that is, according to the crowdsourced hive brain, I just mixed metaphors, who are we to say that they're not pipes? Google should know, and you see that the original Magritte painting is in there.
One could say, Jim, that these are pipe dreams.
Okay, here we go. Foucault wrote, if we wouldn't be complete if we didn't quote some pretentious French intellectual, an entire book with the same title, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. And he argued that the point of the painting was that language is just futile. He said, what we see never resides in what we say. Neither words nor the visible can be reduced to the other's terms. It's in vain that we say what we see. What we see never resides in what we say, and it's in vain that we attempt to show by the use of images, metaphors, or similes what we are saying. I want to say the opposite of that. I want to say that this is how we do what we do, by the use of metaphors and similes and representation. And we define words in terms of other words. That's another lesson from the OED or from dictionaries in general. The words are not attached to the things. They're attached to other words. And so we're in a, if we admit it to ourselves, we're in a kind of endless recursive cycle of representation and more representation. And that's why we've had to invent the word meta. And so my argument with Foucault is not that language is futile, but that it's all we've got. These categories are what we use to create intelligence, and we need to mistrust them and remember how fluid they are.
Fascinating is you look at other cultures' conceptions or categories or ways of thinking about space and time, and space and time seem in some sense to be such fundamental perceptual things, but yet your work shows that different language groups have very different ways of dealing with these things. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight into that?
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about time. Of course, time is at the very core of our experience. You can't experience anything outside of time. It's the very fabric of your existence. And yet, it's hard to get your hands on, right? So you can't see time. You can't feel time with your fingers. You can't taste time or smell time. So on the one hand, it's this very fundamental aspect of experience. On the other hand, what real experience do we have with it? What kind of perceptual or visual experience can you have with time? And this has fascinated many researchers. For a long time, there wasn't the thought that our representation of time would be constructed. So we figured it had to be extracted somehow from the body, somehow from the physiological wiring of the brain and the arrangement of the human body. For example, people started noticing that in English we talk about the future being ahead of us and the past being behind us. So we look forward to the next day, we look back on prior offenses, things like that. And people started arguing that, of course, this is natural because, we have eyes on the front of our heads, not on the back of our heads, and we walk forward, not backwards. So it has to be natural that the future should be ahead and the past behind. But it turns out there are languages that arrange things differently. So one of my colleagues at UCSD, Rafael Nunez, has done wonderful work with the Aymara. They're a group in Bolivia. And in Aymara, the past is in front and the future is behind. And when you look at how the Aymara gesture when they're talking about time, just look at the way they move their bodies, it aligns with their metaphors. So when people are talking about the olden days, they'll gesture in front of them. And this is a system that you could also say makes sense. That Aymara is a language that's very concerned with evidence, how you came to know the things that you know. And so for the Aymara, the past is in front because it has already happened. It's manifest. Whereas the future is unknown, that's why it's behind your head. You can't see it. Right? So for them, it's also a system that appears to obviously emerge from the body, obviously emerge from physics and physiology, and yet it's exactly the opposite of the system that we use. And in fact, as you look across cultures, you can find people who arrange time from left to right, or if they read and write from right to left, then from right to left. Time can go vertically. For example, in Mandarin, the past is up and the future is down. Time doesn't have to go relative to the body. For example, the Kuuk Thaayorre, the Aboriginal Australian group I described, organized time from east to west. So for me, if I'm sitting facing this way and you ask me to arrange things so that they're in the right temporal order, very likely to put things in this order from left to right. That would be the correct answer for an American English speaker. And if I turn my body this way, then the correct answer would be this way. But for the Kuuk Thaayorre, the correct answer is always from east to west. So sometimes it might be like this with respect to the body, sometimes it might be like this, sometimes it might be like this. And depending on which way a Kuuk Thaayorre speaker is facing, they arrange time with respect to their bodies differently, but with respect to the landscape the same. And in fact, time doesn't even have to go in a straight line. So another study by Rafael Nunez looked at the Yukno. This is a group in Papua New Guinea. And for them, time rolls into their village, so it comes downhill into their village. And then as it hits the village, it takes a turn and then goes in a different direction out of the village, and it connects between the source and the mouth of the Yukno River. Okay. So a lot of the things that we used to think are necessary features of physics, necessary features of biology that drive our ideas are not constraints, in fact, for how we conceptualize these things. There's a lot of freedom in how human minds can invent time, can create a representation. It doesn't have to be in a line. It doesn't have to be with respect to the body. It doesn't have to be in any particular direction. There are all these different ways that we can construct it.
And of course, one of the things to bear in mind is that the
I guess I think of scientific language as being just one part of the language community, whether it's scientific language or technical language in any other domain. Languages, as a general rule, gain more words the more people speak the language who work in different occupations and live in different kinds of environments. So English, for example, has lots and lots of words relative to many other languages because it's spoken by such a wide variety of occupations and in such a wide variety of geographical environments. And so scientific communities are doing just the same thing that other communities have been doing. But your question about whether scientific discoveries are changing language, I think even for the very basic words, so time words, for example, are very frequent in English. So the word time itself is the most frequent noun in English. And the words day and year are also in the top 10. And if you think about a word like day, it's a really simple common word, our understanding of what a day is fundamentally has changed when we went from thinking about the sun going around the earth as opposed to the earth going around the sun, right? So what defines a day? Now, fundamentally, the scientific causal model is different. And yet in colloquial use, it probably, for most people, they still think of a day as the amount of time that it takes for the sun to go around the earth. And so I think we can see this kind of tension between what our experience tells us versus what science tells us and how that guides the way we use these words.
Scientists tend to think, I'm going to talk about scientists in the third person because I'm the only person up here who's not a scientist. But is it not the case that scientists tend to think that the words they use are more precise, privileged, would be what academics would call it these days. And that's true. I mean, a lot of the history of science has been a process of definition. I mean, I started by talking about Newton and gravity and force and mass. He not only had to find the words for these things, but then when he found them, he defined them. And he made a point of saying, and he said this about space and time too, that he was going to use these words in a way that was separate from the common use of the words. He said everybody knows what space and time are, but I'm going to talk about space and time in a new way, as something different, and I'm going to define them rigorously. And on the one hand, as somebody who writes about scientists, I believe that. I mean, I'm a big fan of science, and I think that science has progressed that way. But I also think it's true that scientists sometimes believe their own, they fall into the same trap that we've been talking about for the last hour. They start to think that the words have a kind of reality, and they forget that they're just words, and that they're something that they created, and that they're in danger of falling apart. I mean, scientists struggle as much as the rest of us do to say what time is.
That's certainly in cognitive science. This is very much true. There's constant turf wars about what we really mean by perception or attention or cognition or but is this really an effective language on perception, or is it really just perceptual decision, or is it? And so there's this attempt to parcel out different parts of the brain where if it's this anatomical feature, then it's perception, and if it's just a few neurons over, then it's something else. And people are constantly trying to draw these boundaries, and different communities draw the boundaries differently, and it's the same kind of categorical war that you get in any other social political argument about words.
And I think it raises the issue of that, in some sense that we started with, is who gets to decide what is the status of the word. So, I mean, I think one of the things, as Jim was saying about science, is that there is a conception outside of science, I think many people think, because it's come from scientists, it must be true. But what does it even mean to say that something is true? And I think that is one of the ways in which we as a society are now struggling, that often, at least in the public discourse, science is put into a different category. And I think one of the things that we've been discussing today is coming back to the notion that the words are fluid, and it's not necessarily for one group of people to say what they are. But I'd like to just have a few minutes of do we have a little bit of time to have a few minutes of discussion with the audience? So does anyone have questions, comments? Yes?